Hello and welcome everyone to today's workshop on the Economic and Social Research Council's PhD studentships. Before we sort of start the presentation, I just want to let everyone know that this workshop is being recorded, and so if you are comfortable being in the recording, you can switch your videos on, and when we move to the Q&A part, then you can raise your hand and ask your question, but if you do not, then please put your questions in chat, and then we will ask them or put them to the panelists who will be able to answer your question. And please keep yourselves on mute during the presentation, and when we move to the Q&A, you'll get an opportunity to ask your question. Perfect. Okay, so today we will, like always, sort of start with an introduction to Project EduAccess, and then I'll hand it over to the speakers who'll give you an overview of what the studentship is. They'll tell you a little bit about the application process. They'll talk to you about the timeline, the eligibility criteria, then give you sort of general tips that will help you in your applications to the studentship, and then we will move on to a Q&A. Okay, so for those of you who are joining us for the first time, Project EduAccess is a network of individuals and organization that works to making access to higher education, leadership, and professional opportunities, sort of making these accessible to people and learners from marginalized communities. We recognize that all of these opportunities are sort of systematically denied through cost, information, and dispositional barriers. We try to make all of these opportunities accessible through different means. One is we run a mentorship program called the India Graduate Mentorship Program, and then we also run a lot of public workshops that are online, such as the one that you're attending today, and a lot of in-person workshops in different universities in India. And then we also engage in advocacy with different institutions to sort of help address some of these barriers. Today we're joined by two very wonderful people who will be speaking to you about the scholarship or studentship. We have with us Abhishek Vyas, who's doing a PhD in education from Brunel University in London and is an ESRC Grand Union DTP Scholar of 2023. We also have with us Anvita Ramachandran, who's a DPhil in International Development at University of Oxford and is an ESRC Grand Union DTP Scholar of 2021. I think that might be DPhil in International Development Studies, but I'm going to let Anvita clarify, and I'll hand it over to her to take the presentation forward.
Yeah, it's so I did a 2+2. So my MPhil was in development studies and the DPhil is in international development. It's not a very important difference. Hi, everyone. I'm Anvita, as Ms. introduced. And so I thought in the workshop, we'll first start with an overview of the scholarship itself. We understand that the ESRC, DTP sort of scholarship has a lot of jargon, and it's difficult to understand what exactly it entails, what they're looking for. So hopefully we can clarify all of that for you. So the main point is that these particular scholarships are to fund doctoral work. So you're looking ultimately to finish a PhD in some institution in the UK. And the main funding body for these scholarships is the UKRI. They fund not only PhDs, but they also fund larger grants for academics. They fund postdoctoral fellowships, but one part of it is also funding PhD students. And that's to cover both their living costs and as well as the tuition fees that you pay. And in addition, they'll also give you some additional funding for training and other needs that you have during your doctoral studies. So the important point to clarify with these particular types of scholarships is that they're linked to the institution that you're applying to, the university you're applying to, and it's not a separate process. So unlike maybe like the Rhodes or the Gates Scholarship, where there's a separate foundation that takes care of the entire application, here there's a big link between the DTP that's reviewing your application, but also the university that reviews your application. And so the scholarship is open to those who want to study for their doctoral studies, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you need to have had a master's before. There are different pathways through which you can apply for these DTPs. So for example, in my case, I applied for what was called as a 2+2. So I did a 2-year MPhil, which I just completed last year. And then now I'm starting on the PhD part of my research work. So that's the next 2 years. And here the idea really is that the PhD builds on the work that you've done in your master's. If that's not the case, you can also apply directly for the PhD itself, and then you get either 3 years of funding or 4 years of funding. But ultimately, the point is that you need to have finished a PhD. So these type of scholarships will not cover only 1-year masters, only 2-year masters. The basic idea of the scholarship is sort of similar. They'll fund your living costs, which is usually a standard rate that's applied everywhere. It changes according to inflation. And they'll cover your tuition fees. An important point to note here is that these scholarships very recently have been open to international students. Actually, it was only the year that I applied that they opened up to international students, which might be why not a lot of people have heard of them. And they have a limited number of seats for international students. At the moment, it's about 30% of the total number of awards that they give. And because of that, different institutions have different ways they approach international students. The UKRI says that they will always cover the home rate of tuition fees. And usually the institutions themselves will top up that amount and pay the remainder of the fees for the international rate of fees. So that's the case for both me and Abhishek through the Grand Union DTP. But this may be very institution specific. So one recommendation both of us have for you is that you should really read the fine print and see what exactly you're going to get out of the scholarship, monetarily, but otherwise also. The last point is that these DTPs are very institution specific. And so the information is not exactly easy to find. So a good place to start might be to look at these websites like Find a PhD, which puts together information about all the different scholarships that are available so that you can locate the right DTP information more easily. And that being said, the application processes are also very different depending on which institution you're applying to and which DTP you're applying to. So to sort of give you an idea of how this DTP ESRC stuff works, I think Ms. the next slide describes how the funding is structured. It's a little bit complicated, but basically the UKRI, the research institutions, they have different research councils. And these research councils are broadly based on disciplines. So you have a research council for the arts, you have research councils for the social sciences, which is the ESRC, and you have many research councils for the sciences. A lot more funding goes to the sciences than the other disciplines. And so these research councils are take care of funding for all research work in general for universities in these different disciplines, and not just for funding PhD students. And so as you probably realize, both me and Abhishek come under the Economic and Social Research Council because of the kind of disciplines that we're studying. That being said, it's important for you to think about what your discipline falls under, because in some cases, it's very obvious that, like, if you study international development or sociology or political science, you're probably going to be under the Social Science Research Council, the ESRC. But in some cases, it's not obvious. I have a friend of mine who studies experimental psychology, and all of his work is based in a lab, and his research work has a lot of biology and chemistry in it. But for some reason, they put that under the social sciences because psychology is seen as a social science. So it's important for you to just make sure that you're in the right research council DTP. So within each of these research councils, there are different training partnerships. And these are basically groups of institutions in the UK, so different universities that may be clubbed together. And then they get an award from the UK government for funding a certain number of PhD students. So for example, in the case of me and Abhishek, we come from institutions that are part of the Grand Union DTP. So that includes 3 institutions, Oxford, Brunel, and Open. And so within the Grand Union DTP, there are 40 to 50 PhD scholars every year that are chosen by the ESRC. And so, yeah, that sort of gives you a broad overview of how that works. Yeah, you can move on.
Yeah, thank you, Anvita. Hello, everyone. My name is Abhishek, and as Ms. Vyas said, I've just started my PhD in education. at Brunel University London, and I'm on the same scholarship as Anvita, which is the Grand Union DTP studentship. So unlike Anvita, I have applied directly for the PhD. So I already had a master's when I was applying. So I have received 3.5 years funding for my PhD. So a couple of things before I get into the eligibility criteria. A couple of things that I would like to reiterate what Anvita said is that the websites may not have all the information that you're looking for. These things keep changing on a yearly basis sometimes, and there are a lot of logistical or internal requirements. So I think the best way to, or the most, authentic source of information would be the contact person. So they would have listed who is the contact person for a particular DTP and for a particular institution. So the best thing to do is to write to them and get clarifications from them. So that's one thing. Other thing, as just Anita mentioned, that while there are these different research councils, there can be interdisciplinary PhDs as well. So you may be doing something in social sciences, but will have some relation with humanities, or even in STEM and have relation with humanities. So while these are very specific councils, they are open to interdisciplinary projects, but your project has to be mainly located in their discipline. Then you can have interdisciplinary connections. So those are a couple of things. I hope everyone is able to understand the structure. So there's UKRI, there are these 7 councils, and each council offers DTPs. Now, DTPs, as Anita said, are collaboration. The one that we are on is a collaboration between 3 universities, Oxford, Brunel, and Open University. There are some which have like 7, 8 universities as well. So again, there are total, I think, more than 70 universities that are currently participating in these DTPs. So every university will have very specific requirements for how to apply, and there'll also be a separate DTP application. So a lot of moving pieces, but the good thing is, like, if you do get selected, you get full funding. Uh, most of the good universities would provide full fundings for international students as well. And on top of that, you would also receive a lot of research and training support as well. So there will be an internship component that they will fund an internship or an overseas institutional visit, or they will even fund your field work if you are going overseas to do a field work. So it's a very good deal in terms of, like, it's, as the name says, it's literally doctoral training. They are providing specific training to make you doctoral candidates. So yeah, those are just a few points from the overview. Now coming to the eligibility criteria, as Anvita said, you don't need to have a master's, so you need to have an equivalent of a UK honors degree or an equivalent of a master's degree from UK academic, basically UK university. So that is the basic criteria. And this cap of 30% is important. So if you are considered as an international student, so if your residential eligibility, like if you're not a resident of the UK, and they have put on some tests for that. So if you're not a home student, then only 30% of the seats that are offered within a DTP will be open to you. So it might happen, and this that you may have done well, but if they have already taken enough people in that 30% limit, you may not be selected. But still, 30% is a good enough number. And as I said, it offers a lot of wonderful support. So yeah, next slide. Shall I? Yeah.
Yeah, we can both discuss this.
So,
Yeah.
so the application process is a little, I would say, it's what you do first. Do you identify a DTP first and then choose a university? So, for example, in our case, do you see, okay, I want to apply for the Grand Union DTP, and then I have 3 options: Oxford, Brunel, and Open. And again, there are pathways. So there's an education pathway, there'll be a psychology pathway, some other pathways. So you need to identify which you can either choose the DTP and then choose the university, or you can look at a university and then say which DTP is this connected to, and can I apply to that as well. Or the third option is there's a collaborative project studentship. So there will be a project between the university and a non-academic organization, a research project. And for that, they will take on PhD candidates. So they will advertise the whole project. For example, Brunel University has a project with Sport England. So this year they have offered one collaborative project studentship. So they will not have their own project that they have designed. Rather, they'll work on the project that is predefined as a collaboration between Brunel and Sport England. So these are the three, just kind of reiterating that, either you find the DTP and then you find the university, or you look for the university and then see which DTP it is connected to. And also look out for collaborative projects because, there you don't necessarily need to provide a longer proposal, but you kind of need to find something which is related to what the project advertised is. Anvita?
Yeah, so if you're on a collaborative project, then I guess you have a little less flexibility about what kind of research work you'll be doing for your PhD. And so that's probably the minority of people who apply for the collaborative studentships. But for the vast majority, you'll also have to come up with a research proposal of your own. And that's probably one of the most important steps of the application process. And the most important criteria for them is because is what kind of research work will you be doing when you're doing a PhD. That being said, if you're applying for a master's plus a PhD, it'll look a little different in the sense that you don't have to really commit to the PhD proposal and give a lot of details, but you need to have a very clear understanding of how you're going to be, the kind of methods that you're going to be using, how you're going to be contributing to the literature, the basics of a general research proposal. And I'm sure Project EduAccess gives a lot of resources as to how to write a research proposal. But in addition, it's very important to make that connection between the research work that you're going to be doing and the kind of impact that's going to have more broadly on society and the economy. And this is an important point for the ESRC specifically because at the end of the day, they're giving money to you for you to study something, and the return for them is what kind of societal impact is this going to have. They need to be able to prove that the research work that you're doing is for the benefit of society. I know it sounds very daunting to think about, my research work has to improve people's lives. It sounds a little too much for someone who's, I don't know, in the mid-20s or 30s. But you can define impact in the way that is most suitable. It could be conceptual, it could be methodological. But the point is that it has to be concrete, and you need to be able to articulate it well in your application. The other point is to think about what kind of collaborations you can have. So if you are part of a collaborative studentship, then that's already pretty obvious. There's already a collaboration within your PhD. But the UKRI is big on, or the SRC in general is big on collaborations between academics and non-academics. So how are you going to be bringing the questions or the findings that you have to maybe an NGO or to a government institution or to an industry? How are you going to translate that kind of the findings that you have to a non-academic organization? How are you going to maybe collaborate or conduct your research along with a non-academic organization? So you need to think about those type of collaborations and write about that in your application as well. And then the last part is to think about the training that you need. Ultimately, it says Doctoral Training Partnership, and that training component is very important. So you need to describe not only what kind of training you already have, but also what is the training that you need during your PhD for you to be able to conduct your research work. That could be maybe you have to learn a language that you don't know already, or that cannot be taught in the UK and you need to go somewhere else to learn that language. Or maybe you need very advanced statistical training. And in that case, is there a course in your university that you can apply for, or maybe you have to go somewhere else to study? You need to be very clear about what it is that you need. And the good thing is that the DTP wants to and has the funding to give you that training. So you can take 3 months within your funding period to go to another university and study, or you can take those 3 months and learn a difficult language in another place. And so the point is that they want you to make use of all the resources that they have, and they want to know that you have a clear ambition and clear idea of what you want to do in those 3-4 years for your PhD.
Just one more thing, and we'll kind of emphasize this a lot because at least my supervisors kind of harped on that word impact. So ESRC really wants to see impact. So apart from writing your proposal and every like the normal stuff that you write for a PhD, they really want to know what is like the knowledge exchange, what is the academic impact of what you're doing within your discipline. So uh, I think this word impact, and just if you're looking to apply, especially for ESRC, look what impact means to ESRC and try to incorporate things within your proposal. You will have a separate section within your application, but also like emphasize on impact. This is something that my supervisors told me for like a long time. So if you're thinking of it, this word impact is really important.
This is just a quick summary of what the DTP process looked like for me and Abhishek, because this is what the Grand Union DTP application looks like. That being said, the application process is different for each DTP. And so it's not you need to really check what the application material requirements are. Most of them have very similar components. So a summary of your research proposal, any plans for methods training or field work, your personal statement. You can see that the personal statement is a little shorter, but that's because you should also have a personal statement for your university application. So this should be a more concise version of that. Then again, very specified collaborations with non-academic institutions. Here, my recommendation is that you should name the institutions that you want to collaborate with, and be very specific about like what it is that you want to do with them. And then of course describe what kind of training you have before. And some DTPs will have very specific awards for different categories. So for example, in our DTP, in the Grand Union DTP, there are a select number of awards given for those who want to do advanced quantitative methods. In that case, there'll be a separate supplementary section that you need to fill out. Yeah.
Again, like as I said, in the fourth component, collaboration with academic institutions and impact. So here again, you need to show what impact will your work have in academia and society at large. The reason why they want to see this is, unlike, let's say, the university applications, where in my understanding, the focus is more on your profile as to who you are, what you have done. And your proposal is important, but that's probably a smaller component compared to ESRC. In ESRC, your proposal, your project is really crucial. So they want to see through your project what is the impact that you want trying to create within academia and the society. So just again, I'll keep on pointing this out. Yeah.
And to add to Abhishek, the research proposal that you might write for a university might be a bit different from this type of a research proposal, because what academic institutions look for is how you're going to contribute to academia, like to knowledge production. Whereas here, the translation from that knowledge to impact and to society is also very important. So you can't just, it's not enough to say, oh, I'm going to fill this literature gap, or I'm going to add to this academic debate. You also need to explain why doing that is going to be beneficial for people in general. So yeah, again, the same thing about impact.
Yeah, so the timeline, it's difficult for us to explain that here, but usually the DTP applications start somewhere around October and they end somewhere around January. So beginning of the UK academic year to January is roughly the timeline within which you need to apply for the DTP. The university deadlines will be different. For example, Cambridge has some way earlier, Oxford has in January. So basically, different universities will have different deadlines. So two deadlines that you need to know. One is the university deadline, and other is the DTP deadline. And again, how do you go about applying? Do you directly apply, or do you send it to your university? All those things, you need to contact the coordinator of that DTP from that university. So every DTP, as I said, will have different universities. And then there will be a contact point in each of these universities, and their names will be clearly advertised. I have put a link in the chat, and you can see that this list might change from this year, because this were DTPs from 2017 to 2023. But here you can see, the universities are listed and the contact points are listed. So you'll know whom to write to. So just go to them and figure out. But usually the rough timeline is start somewhere in October end somewhere in January.
One thing I want to note is, so usually, at least in the case of the Grand Union DTP, we had to apply to Oxford or I had to apply to Oxford at least, and to the DTP at the same time in the same application. So it was an extra form that I had to attach to the main application. And usually the university will have access to both those applications. So it's useful to think about like making sure that there's some complementarity between what you write in your university application and what you write in your DTP application, because they usually read both of them simultaneously. And the other thing to note is that the timeline to hear back from the DTP is also, it's not very clear. Usually you'll first hear back from the university as to whether or not you got admission, and then you need to wait for some time to hear back from the DTP as to whether or not you were successful. And so it's useful at least to think about your planning about when you're going to attend your PhD and when you can join, to think about like how much time in advance do you need to know before you can make that commitment to take up the university offer. It might be that you hear back from the university, like this was the case for me. I heard back from the university in March or April, and I didn't hear back from the DTP about my award until much later. And I had to commit to the university before I got information about whether I got the scholarship or not. So in that case, it's very important for you to communicate with the university and ask them whether you were successful in the preliminary stages or not, so that you can at least make that informed decision before you commit to a university without knowing whether or not you got the funding.
And also, again, so this is why we were saying it's very specific, because even in the same DTP, I had a different experience. So for me, it was told that within April or May, you will hear about your result, and I did hear about my result. So they were probably, again, it depends on, Oxford usually takes more candidates under this DTP. So maybe their procedure is different. Brunel has comparatively lesser candidates that they take under this DTP, because we'll explain how the process works. But basically, again, you need to read the fine print here. So the step would be to first either identify the university or the DTP, and then like you need to make a specific deadline for each application, and there's no uniform deadline or uniform way of applying. Can we go to the next slide? So this is again an example of Grand Union DTP. It might look different for other DTPs, but this is just to give an idea about how it works. So in the Grand Union DTP, what happens is first you apply to the university, and you apply like you are, as Anvita said, you make your main application, you make your DTP application, and both these applications go to the university, to the department. And then your department or your university will nominate you for a central studentship. So let's say in case of Grand Union DTP, there'll be some people that Oxford nominates, some people that Brunel nominates, and some people that Open nominates. And all these candidates will together then be put for review for a central studentship competition. So the first step is that your university nominates you, depending on your university application and your DTP application. So they actually have to fill out a nomination form, which has a lot of details about, a lot of accessible details about your profile and your project and everything. So first that has to happen. And then basically what happens is, for Grand Union DTP, you are graded on 4 criteria: academic and professional experience, aptitude and potential, doctoral research proposal, and planning for knowledge exchange and impact. Again, impact. And these are 4 equally weighted components. So you are marked out of 20, right? And 6 academics independently review your application, and they score you out of 20. So as you can see, it's a very rigorous process. That first you need to get selected in the university, then the university needs to nominate you. Then your application is looked at by 6 people, and then then you're given a score. And then, so here everyone is kind of equal, because every university has nominated its students. So it doesn't matter which university has nominated you. What matters is what score you get. Once you're nominated, everyone is equal. It doesn't matter which university has nominated. And then based on the score that you get, as I've explained here, you will be considered for the studentship. And the 30% international student criteria will also apply. So even if you have international candidates who are ranked high, but if the 30% cap is filled, then you may not be selected.
One point to note is that the 6 academics that review your application, they may or may not be from your specific discipline or from that department. So when you write your research proposal, you might also want to make sure that you're writing it such that any social science professor can understand what it is that you're going to do. They're obviously very smart academics, so they'll understand anyway, but just keep that in mind. So these are just some general tips. I think we've been harping on this impact word for most of the session. So that's obviously very important. There's a little bit of like maybe jargon that the ESRC uses. They always call this knowledge exchange, which is essentially what they're trying to make you do through these collaborations with non-academic institutions. Ultimately, what they do not want is for your PhD to just be a book that's written and it's in the library and then that's all that's ever happened to it. They want to see how are you going to translate that work, maybe such that non-academics can understand it. Are you going to present it in places that are not academic institutions? And maybe work in one of these non-academic organizations for some time and see what kind of collaborations can be brought about with your research work. So that's where this knowledge exchange is really important. And then, of course, and the idea of collaborative research really is that they don't want you to, and this is especially the case in the social sciences, where you sort of do research work, you might interview some people, you might work with a particular organization for some time, but then all you do is you write about them, but you don't write with them. And so here, it's again this idea of working collaboratively such that it's not just your academic output that's coming out, but there's also some output that's coming more broadly for the people that you're working with. So yeah, these are the really important points that you need to be able to tackle in your application.
And when it comes to this collaborative research, if you are awarded the studentship, there is a component for an internship. So you can do up to a 3-month internship. So they do want that your work is not strictly within the silos of academic confines, but it has, like, you are able to gain non-academic experience as well. So when you talk about impact, when you talk about knowledge exchange, mention how what you're going to do will be in, correlation or in collaboration with non-academic institutions as well. They will give you very specific prompts. So the application form has very specific questions, and these, like, you will be able to identify these key prompts. But keep that in mind. As we said again, this is slightly different from a university application because it looks at these components as well. The next is reach out to a potential supervisor as soon as possible. I think that's like a general PhD application advice, but for ESRC more specifically, because as I said, the university application looks different, the DTP application looks slightly different. So reach out to the supervisor and also know that they are aware of the ESRC DTP. So sometimes I was fortunate in the sense that the person I applied to was the pathway lead for the DTP. So she had been looking at these things for years. So she knew exactly what the DTP requirements are and what the university requirements are. So she was able to guide me kind of seamlessly on both ends. But in your case, you might be reaching out to a supervisor who may not know what the DTP requirements are. So just ensure that if they don't, you bring this to their notice that this is an application I'm doing alongside this, and how do I have a symmetry between them.
In my case, it was a little different because I applied for the master's first. So I didn't actually have a supervisor chosen at the time. But for me, it was actually useful to do the master's and then do the PhD through the ESRC, because through the master's, I was able to work with my supervisor on my master's thesis. And now she's also the supervisor for my PhD. So it was a little bit of a different process. But yeah, so I guess it varies depending on whether you apply directly for the PhD or you do the master's plus PhD.
Again, read the fine print. We wish we could make this session more comprehensive and give you like exact deadlines and things like that, but that is not possible to do in an hour-long session. So I put on the link, and from there it will guide you to the specific DTP, and then you will see each DTP will have different application processes. So read the fine print. If you're not clear, reach out to the person who is coordinating it. Can you just go back to the previous slide? So this is again to give you an idea of what they are looking for. You will see that, 50% of the application at least is about your proposal and what you're planning to do, right? So it's kind of equal. Your academic and professional experience, your aptitude, that is more of like your profile, and your proposal and your planning for exchange and impact is kind of your research, your project. So I don't know if all DTPs do this way, but I would assume they might, because again, the idea is your proposal. So they are looking at everything. They're not just looking at what score you got, or whether you have it obviously helps to have a good score. It obviously helps to have publications, to have received awards previously. All of that, those things push you. But even if there's like a slight, you're slightly lower in one of the components, there are other ways in which your score can be improved. So you know don't reject yourself before applying. And yeah. Can you go to
But just to add to that, because a lot of people, if they've worked a lot in, they have a lot of professional experience, they sometimes think that that's a disadvantage when they apply for a PhD because they don't have publications or they haven't gone to conferences. And I just want to point out that that professional experience can be written in such a way that it's a benefit for the ESRC, because it probably means that you have very good contacts in these non-academic organizations. Maybe you've worked in the government for some time, you worked in an NGO for some time before you start your PhD. Maybe you can craft your application in such a way that you leverage those contacts you already have, and then that can make your application even more stronger. Just going off of what Abhishek just said. Yeah. I think those are most of the points that we've written, but I'm sure all of you have a lot of questions. So maybe we can move on to that.
So I think there's some questions in the chat. Should we take them first and then, or?
Yeah, I think there are a few questions in chat, so maybe we begin with that.
Yeah, and then we'll go to Afreen.
Yeah.
So the first question is, do these non-academic institutions need to be a formal corporates or international organizations such as the UN and government bodies? Aisha, I don't think I've understood your question. Could you maybe
Yeah,
expand?
hi.
Hi.
So, you guys were talking about including collaboration with non-academic institutions, right? So, I was wondering if those need to be, like, for example, I want to apply for a PhD in education, just like you, right? So, I'm wondering, there's a lot of non-academic collaboration that can happen in this sphere. So, like, I can think of collaborating with a part of a body of United Nations or a government body to bring in systemic changes in the pedagogy or anything else. Or it could also be working with corporates, because a lot of CSR initiative talking about South India. Uh, so that can also happen. So is there a particular guideline or preference that this kind of collaboration weighs more than the other?
No. So I can tell you about my application, because I mentioned NGOs. I even mentioned a local bank. That maybe so I wanted, so it's not necessarily because if you say, oh, I'm going to collaborate with UNESCO, they might think it's a bit far-fetched that UNESCO will probably collaborate with a PhD candidate. So
Yeah. I know.
it's
Just
more
an example.
yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's I think it's not the stature of the organization, or it's basically how does it relate to yours. So for me, I am looking at non-violence, and I come from Ahmedabad, and my project is situated in Ahmedabad. So I said there are Gandhian institutions which I am connected with, like I have some contacts with. So I will be kind of collaborating with them. So Sabarmati Ashram or Gujarat Vidyapeeth. So again, the idea is that these institutions or these organizations are related to my project, and I'm saying that I will work with them. There will be a knowledge exchange that I'm trying to look for. So it does not have to be a specific kind of organization. They just want to see that you're not just limited to academic application, and are also seeing potential for knowledge exchange. Anvita, do you want to add something?
Yeah, just to add to that, the non-academic is pretty important, because sometimes you can think, oh, I'll like collaborate with maybe another research institute, or there are a lot of organizations like JPAL, for example, in development that do research work, but I guess they're not I mean, in the case of JPAL, they're related to MIT, but they conduct survey work, for example, in a developing country, or they're producing research work of their own, and you're just collaborating with them in order to further your own research work. That doesn't count as a non-academic organization. Rather, I think they're looking for either an NGO or a government body, but or a corporate, or all those categories work. But I don't think they have any like specific. It's not like a preference for government over non-government. They're very open. In some cases, like you mentioned the UN. I know I have friends within the DTP who've done their 3-month internship in the UN. And one of the reasons was the UN internships are not paid for, whereas and in the case, and because of that, the DTP will actually give you the stipend that you would have needed in order to take up those internships. And because in the case of my friend, for example, he was working with the trade part of the UN, and his work is on trade. And so it was a very direct way for him to understand, personally, for him to understand how these institutions work, but also to contribute his research work to the workings of the UN. And of course, that period of 3 months was paid for by the ESRC. So it's not impossible for you to think about working with the UN or working with a government organization, but also you can work with a non-government as well.
And when she says paid for,
Sorry, go ahead.
No, please.
No, actually, I had a follow-up question. So I have worked for like 4 years with TFI, Teach for India. That also works in the domain of education. So let's say if I have to write in the non-academic collaboration, the organization that I worked for already in the past, does that
That's very good. Yeah.
In fact, that shows that you have you are more likely to do that. As I said, I named the organizations that I already know and have contacts in, so I know I can reach out to them and do this. Same with you, like if you work with TFI, they have a strong alumni thingy that I know of. You can actually mention that this is something that I have already worked with, have all these contacts, not in so many words, but just mentioning that it's actually good that you mention something that you've worked with, so they know you're more likely to do that.
Exactly.
Okay, thank you.
The next question is, if the university does not select the student but the DTP provides the award, that will not happen because your university nominates you for the DTP. So if you don't have a university place, I don't think they will nominate you for the DTP.
I think it's a little different with other scholarships where you sometimes get the scholarship first and then the university application happens afterwards. Here it's always the university first accepts your application and puts forward your name to the DTP, and only then the DTP will consider you. So that's not possible.
Devika, I've sent a link. Just like a caveat, this link might be updated soon because this was still 2023, but you'll get an idea that what these DTPs look like.
Yeah, that is something to keep in mind, that the process changes almost every year. They have new number of awards. The partnerships between the institutions might change. So currently it's between Oxford, Brunel, and Open in the case of the Grand Union DTP. We don't know next year whether that's going to still be there or not. So if you're maybe not applying this year, you're applying the next year, make sure you recheck whether the same application material holds or not. Yeah.
The next question is, some courses have an early deadline of 10 November, but the DTP form for this application is not yet out. Could you please tell by when it will be out? I think it will be very specific to the DTP and reach out to the coordinator.
So I'm not sure about the early deadline, but most universities have early deadlines, but they also have scholarship deadlines. So in the case of Oxford, for example, you can apply in November, but I know that they will only accept scholarships up until January. So if you can apply later as well, but that means you won't get a scholarship. So yeah, just make sure that you're checking which specific deadline it is. It might not be necessary for you to apply that early in November. Yeah.
And again, the best person would be the coordinator, the contact person. Reach out to them with as specific questions as you can. But I'm assuming even if you complete your university application first and the ESRC form comes out later, as long as you have told them I want to apply for this, I think the two can work together as well. Anvita?
Yeah, no, that's I think contacting the DTP person in the institution, that's the best bet that you have, because clearly they have a way in which they envision this application process to go through. So maybe there's something that they have not posted at their website, or they're just not being clear about. You can always feel free to reach out. This is one place where you should not be shy about asking questions.
And this might happen because, as Anvita said, this year is going to be renewed, or new partnerships might form. So maybe because of that, there can be a slight delay. Again, don't wait for the website to show things. Write to the people and ask them what is the timeline that you're looking at, and tell them that you want to apply, and have your supervisor's support as well. So those things are important. The next question is, if we have zero prior research experience, professional qualifications not requiring a dissertation, how do we go about framing that?
My advice would be you clearly have some professional experience, and you need to think about how you can translate that professional experience into the skills you need to be a researcher. So, for example, maybe in your professional work, you had to read a lot of material, or you had to use some specific set of skills. And maybe you can describe how that will help you. Hopefully, you already have an undergraduate degree, so that would have also involved some amount of coursework and academic experience. So yeah, you just need to think a little carefully about how to translate that into research work, and show through your research proposal that you have those skills. Because one way in which they assess your abilities in terms of your ability to write, like a literature review, those type of things, is through the research proposal itself. So even if you don't have that experience on your CV per se, to say I was a research assistant, or I did like this in this publication, your research proposal will tell them how good you are in terms of thinking and ideating for a research project.
Sorry, actually, I would still want you to explain what your question was, because from what I have understood, there is a section which asks for some prior research training. So what do you mean by zero prior research experience? If you have done a master's, maybe you would have written a dissertation or something like that. So can you explain what you mean by zero?
Sure. So
yeah.
I've done chartered accountancy, which is stay at home, study all you can, and write exams. And the work experience, again, is in the field of audit and assurance, which, while it involves a lot of the qualitative research techniques, it isn't per se academic research, which is why I mentioned there is zero prior research experience. And while I've done my own work and through other avenues in terms of social entrepreneurship, etc., and I want to pursue a qualification in the field of policy and social intervention, I'm trying to figure out, one, how do I go about writing a convincing research proposal, but also communicating to them in an adequate way that I understand I do not have what would be considered a baseline, but I'd still welcome a chance to be able to do work in the field.
So you have a master's, right? Have you done a master's?
I mean, it would equate to a master's, yes.
Okay. So I think one way of framing that would be within your work also you would have done research of different kinds, right? For your social entrepreneurship and other things. So I mean, when you do any kind of enterprise work, you do put in some research behind it. So maybe giving it that, framing it that, I did this kind of data collection, let's say, for my enterprise and things like that. So they do require you to write something about your prior research experience, and I don't think to write that, I do not have any research experience, might be a helpful thing. So maybe you can find other things that you have done which is not academic research per se, but did involve research components, did involve, let's say, data collection, or you were a field investigator for something or something like that. So
Awesome.
you would need to find those things.
Yeah, so I don't have to tell them zero academic research. I can, as Anvita, and yeah, of course, I don't give them the red flag. But as Anvita mentioned, as you have mentioned as well, focus on the actual research that we've done, and then we leave it to their judgment.
Yeah. I think we can take Afrin's question and then other questions. Afrin?
Hi, thank you, project team, Project EduAccess and Abhishek, Anvita for organizing this. I have a question specifically for Anvita. I am applying for development studies and under UKRI, I am eligible for ESRC as well because I want to go for the pathway 2+2. While you were speaking about the potential advisor and getting in touch with your advisor, I just wanted to know, were you in touch with somebody while doing your Oxford application when you were planning for your 2+2 pathway, or you just submitted an application and did all the questions, all the questions that you mentioned for the under ESRC DTP application form? And did you mention in your application form that you were in touch with somebody and that person has agreed to sort of supervise you, because the idea ultimately is to get a doctoral training under the program? So I just wanted to know, how did you specifically went about, because Abhishek was like, he was very much in the beginning with touch with somebody. So I just wanted to know if you could speak a little bit more about your
Yeah, no, absolutely. So my experience was quite different from Abhishek because I applied for the MPhil first, and I did not reach out to a supervisor at the time. I had already read up on the different professors in my department, and I knew who I wanted to work with, which was also sort of the reason as to why I was applying to that particular department. And so in my application material, I wrote that this is the supervisor that I would like to work with because her areas of interest are similar to mine. And so in that way, I was very specific in my application, but I had never spoken to her before I got to Oxford. And for me, it was actually beneficial because in the 2 years of my master's, I worked with her on my master's dissertation, and I got to understand what our working relationship was like. I realized, for me, it was a very positive experience because she was a very good supervisor. And so that only reaffirmed that I wanted to continue with her as my supervisor for the DPhil, for the PhD. But it is also possible in that period of your master's, if you don't get along with your supervisor or the one that you indicated in your master's application, because you're in that institution and you know who all the different professors are, they've probably taught you for some of your courses, you can probably reach out to a different supervisor and change the supervision structure. So there is some flexibility in that 1+3 or 2+2 pathway, which I didn't have that much of hindsight when I applied for the 2+2, but now I think about it and it was actually a very good decision to do that.
All right, thank you. Would you recommend, like, for example, I know somebody who I want to work under, like I think Simukai Chiguru's work is very similar, not very
You're applying to audit next year. Nice.
Yes, I'm planning on.
Okay.
I'm just planning, like a friend was recommending that I should write to him and like ask him if he would be happy to sort of supervise me, because that's how he got in. Like he had applied to the program by writing to Simukai, and like they had an online meeting. Would you recommend something like that? Or
Yeah,
I'm
you
just
should
nervous
definitely
about the
reach
whole
out.
process right now.
No,
Yeah.
you can definitely reach out to him, even if it's for the master's. He's also, this is only very specific Oxford information, but he's also the course director for the MPhil in Development Studies. So in general, he'll be a good contact for you to reach out to now.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Anvita.
Yeah. And just a general guideline, general advice, not just for the DTP, but in like reaching out to a supervisor. If you think someone's work is relevant and you like that, write to them. And when you write to them, tell them what your project is, tell them what you're interested in, how your project and their interests are related. So, kind of make a very strong pitch to them about why, because that is important. If you have supervisor support or someone who is in principle backing you from the beginning, that gives you a lot of confidence, and they might even review your application material. They might give you some feedback to a certain degree. So if you know that there is someone you would like to work with, write to them. The most they can say is no. So yeah. And also, like going back to Aisha's question, I just looked at my application form, and so you do not require prior research training if you're applying for masters. So the section that I said you need to write about prior research methods training, it says that candidates for master's program do not need to complete this section. So it may not be necessary that they would not expect you to have a lot of research experience at undergrad level, or if you've not done a research master's. So that's one.
I'm looking to apply to a PhD looking to apply to a PhD program. So I think the 2+2 route or 1+3 route makes sense in that case.
Yes. So the next question is, what is the DTP application procedure? if I apply without institution backup and supervisor, you can't. You can't apply directly to UKRI or to ESRC. You have to go through a research organization, which is normally a university. So
in some cases,
that's
there
my
are
understanding.
universities that, like a research institute, for example, that might offer an ESRC DTP studentship, but that's very few numbers. Yeah.
But even that, you need institution backup.
But you still need the institutional backing. There's no way of doing
Yeah.
it without the institutions.
Yes. So yeah, if it's like, in some specific project, you still have to go through the institution. Yeah, because ESRC gives money to these like DTPs, which goes to the specific institutions. So they you cannot do it without. The next question is, what do you mean by prior research method training? Is it necessarily a research methodology workshop, etc.? So it basically, I can tell you what I had mentioned. So because I had already done a research MPhil, so I mentioned what my MPhil research was, what kind of research methods training I received as a part of my MPhil. And then I also mentioned some of the, conference presentation work that I had done. I'd also worked as a researcher somewhere. So mentioning those things, your academic training in research, like either through a degree or something like that, or the experience that you have gained as a researcher by being a part of a particular research project. So those kind of things can go. If you have published something, if you have written something, you can mention that this is the research training. So it's not necessarily that you attended a workshop. Mentioning that is also good. But what they're specifically looking for, if I can read that out for you, is it says the ESRC expects all DTP funded students to develop a competent understanding of debates in their discipline, an overview of the philosophy of social research and how it informs design, methods, and analysis and representation of findings, and an understanding of a range of research techniques. So they're saying, please give full details of the prior research methods training you have or will have undertaken within your current/previous master's training program, listing the research design and qualitative and quantitative methods courses you have taken, including course modules and weighting in degree. So they really want to know how trained you are in research. And if you're applying directly for a PhD, you would have done a master's. So they would want to know during that master's what kind of research training you had obtained. The next question is, what if university admission comes later than DTP? If you see now, ESRC deadline is December, several university in January. What is in such case? Will the university support ESRC application before giving admission? Anita, would you like to take this one?
When you say ESRC deadline is in December, what do you mean exactly? In this particular DTP you're applying for, there's a separate application for the DTP that's before the university application. Yeah. Yeah, this might be again a point to
this question by Ramu. Ramu, could you
elaborate?
What you mean?
Yeah, hello.
Hi.
Hi, my question is, see, now the DTP application is open now, like it is October 24th to December 27th is the last date. If you see the Oxford deadline, it will be in the January some date. So without institutional support, I mean, if I should get a Oxford admission to apply for the DTP application now, what in the case if I cannot if I can't get the admission from Oxford and I move application for the DTP, what is the case? What is the it is not possible, right? As you said, you cannot go without a institutional backup.
In the case of Oxford, and I don't think they've changed the process until now. You usually apply for the DTP and for the to Oxford at the same time in the same application. So I'm a little confused about why you're saying that the application deadline is before.
And even if the application deadline is later for Oxford, you can apply right now, or let's say November, and you can complete both your applications right now. The deadline is the last date to submit. So if you submit both the things right now, like before the ESRC deadline, then it's up to them whether they nominate you or not. So you would be done on your part if you complete both the applications before the ESRC deadline.
Yeah, and in any case, you should always apply by the scholarship deadline and not the university before the university deadline, because as I said before, you can apply to Oxford up until February or March, but if you apply that late, you're definitely not going to get any scholarships from Oxford or from external sources as well. So the earlier is always the better.
Even that in such case also, whom should I prefer? Like I should I talk to supervisor, supervisor, without contacting them, without an institutional backup? I mean, after getting the admission only, I can take the conversation with the supervisor, with potential supervisor, and all, right? I mean, the institution is most important in this application process, that I understand. I is confused in this case.
You're confused about whether to reach out to the supervisor before you get the admission, or are you applying directly for a PhD or for a master's?
PhD.
Directly, yeah. So for the PhD application, even before you apply, it's always recommended that you get you personally reach out to the supervisor and with the research proposal, and then maybe you might even have a call with them and discuss what your research proposal is, and they will normally informally tell you yes or no, I can take you on as a student, and then you apply formally to the university. I mean, Abhishek, you probably went through this process. And you can clarify how that happens, because the supervisor is probably going to be on the admissions committee when they apply you, and they need to be able to say, okay, I have the capacity to take a student. So that will happen before the PhD application, and then the PhD and the DTP application sort of happens simultaneously at the same time. This is how I understand it being the case in Oxford. But yeah, Abhishek, if you have a different experience.
Possible in this 1 month time period, both securing the admission at the university and then moving simultaneously with the scholarship, ESRC scholarship.
So as we said, the university will move your application. So you need to
You don't
submit
have to do anything.
the ESRC form, and they'll tell you what else to attach with it, and you have to submit that to the university. So you're not applying to ESRC directly. You are submitting these materials to the university, and university will use these materials to nominate you for the central studentship competition. So again, taking the example of Grand Union DTP, people from Oxford, they would have applied to Oxford, both the application and the DTP form, and the particular department would have then nominated them. Same with Brunel, same with Open, and all these people together would be graded as we mentioned. So you don't apply separately to ESRC. Both applications at the initial stage go to the university, which then chooses whether they want to nominate you. I think that's what I have understood.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So if it's still not clear, let us know. Yeah.
But you see, that's what I'm saying. If you have any questions, because these are very, very institution specific and DTP specific things, write to the DTP coordinator at that specific university or the DTP coordinator in general and clarify these questions. Yeah. The next question is, do blogs count as published work? For instance, in case of gender or legal history. So if published in like a decent portal, because blogs can also go in different places, but I think usually they do reflect on your research potential, your ability to, come up with something that is accessible as well as academic. So yeah, if you have written blogs, mention that in your CV, mention that as well.
It also maybe depends on what the blog is. I guess the question is it peer reviewed or not? That's probably more important. So you can write peer reviewed article or something like that. If that makes sense. So it's not like I have a personal blog and I'm just writing whatever I feel like. That's probably not going to count. But if it's like somebody else, an editor has reviewed your work and has published it in their like a known blog or a known newspaper or something like that, maybe that counts better.
I think the next question, Anvita, you can take it.
Yeah. So like I've worked with an organization, and like in their website, I've published my blogs on legal history, basically. So does that count as a prior research experience? Like for instance, you said like academic as well as non-academic experience counts. So would that be in academic or would that be in non-academic? Because that's totally a different organization. It's not connected to any academic institution per se, but they do publish articles and blogs and that kind of things. So where does my work stand in that case?
And how exactly are these? Like, are you writing about that you're putting forward an argument and you're writing with evidence in a very academic style, or is what
Yeah,
exactly?
yeah. It's basically source based. For instance, in gender history, I worked on Humayunama and those kind of like main medieval sources. So would
Okay.
that be purely academic, or would that also count as non-academic?
I think you should definitely list these things in your CV. Normally you like list your publications, but I would maybe separate the publications that are in like a working paper or a journal versus those that are like you said, like a blog or a newspaper or something like that. But you should not mention it. You should definitely mention it. And sorry, can you clarify whether this is like edited by somebody, or is it like whatever you write was accepted, or was there some sort of peer review process that you went through?
There was a process. We had to submit it to the editor, and then they used to like there was an editorial panel, and then they used to review it and then publish it accordingly.
Okay, so there's some like selection process. So then you should write like, I don't know, peer-reviewed article or something like that, and then list these things under it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
The next question, I think, Anita, you can take. It's about development studies.
Yeah, I'm planning to apply for a master's course in development studies, where the application asks for 2 research samples. Okay. Could you clarify whether you have any dissertation or any sort of like written sample already, or what is your background basically? Have you done a master's, or have you done a undergrad that had some research component? I think Ojasvi.
Or just if you want to ask, yeah, you can unmute and ask your question.
Okay, that's fine. I can maybe just describe what I submitted, because I had only an undergraduate degree. And so in my case, there were 2 classes I took in my during my undergrad that had like a slightly longer form of like an essay that I had to submit at the end of the term. And I used both. I used 2 samples, basically, one from 2 different courses. So in that case, my writing sample was actually not directly related to my research work, but I did that sort of strategically because I have a background in economics, and I was applying for a development studies program that also includes, it's a multidisciplinary degree, right? So there's not just economics, but there's also anthropology and political science. And within my undergrad, I had also taken, I think, 2 courses that were broadly related to, that were more broad social sciences and had required essays that were not directly related to economics. So I submitted those 2 essays to show the admissions committee that I also had like those writing skills and those more qualitative sort of writing abilities. And then, of course, my research work itself, like I done some internships that were not internships, but like research assistant work that was in economics. So that way I was sort of able to balance with the writing sample and with my CV that I have both those skills. Some people in their undergrad would have done some sort of an undergraduate thesis. So you probably might have to like, you can't submit 10,000 words. They usually have a word limit of 5,000. So condense that, maybe show them only one section of the like the main analysis part, to show your like your writing skills and your research analysis skills. Some people who have no prior writing samples might have to write something new and provide that. That'll take a lot of time, so you need to be wary and carve out the time to be able to produce something like that within the next 2-3 months, really. Okay.
I think there are more questions.
There's a question that says, what is the aptitude and potential that you've mentioned as one of the requirements? I know it sounds very vague when you say aptitude, but it's probably, I'm sure they're looking for your academic performance. So in your undergrad, like your transcript, your grades, how well you've done, as well as your prior experience, right? That usually speaks for also like any honors or awards that you've received already. in many of these cases, like if you've gotten some best student prize or something like that, it means that somebody else has recognized your potential, which means that now the scholarship committee has an idea about what your potential is. It's a problem in the sense that the same people tend to keep getting more and more awards. But it's important, if you have received anything like that, that you mention it. And then, of course, any professional experience that you have that demonstrates that you have the skills for research and for conducting your PhD work. All of that counts. So I think it's a very broad way of just saying like your CV.
Okay, there are a few more questions. Can you apply for DTP and try out luck for university studentship? Yeah. So the only thing I think you cannot do is probably apply through multiple universities for the same DTP. I think that is the only thing that's probably discouraged. That for the same DTP, if you apply through different universities, that I think is discouraged. But you can apply to multiple DTPs, and you can apply for DTP. You can apply for anything and everything within that university. So yeah, there's no cap on that. I think yeah. Ojasvi has provided an explanation.
Okay, it says, I'll not be able to write one writing sample from scratch. Thus, could you let me know if a proper quantitative qualitative analysis is required to be done, or whether an argumentative essay is absolutely fine? Both of my essays were argumentative, and there was, not a lot of primary research work that was involved in it. So that is if you're applying for, I think you mentioned you're applying for an MPhil in development studies, so I think that's fine.
And for some, because I also applied to the DPhil in Oxford, and I received like an admission there. If you are like for writing samples, you can also use something that you've written for your master's dissertation, let's say, because I did that. And you can kind of take a chapter and, reframe it. Like, don't just copy paste the whole chapter, like kind of edit it a little bit, but you can use a prior work in some cases, but read the specific instructions. Okay. All right, I think those are the questions. If you have any other specific questions to me, or like I'll put my email ID here.
Yeah, I'll also give everyone my email ID
to reach out. Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah, that was a lot. Thank you so much, Anvita and Abhishek, for giving such a comprehensive presentation and then being so patient with all of the questions that came your way. I don't see any pending questions in chat, and I don't see anyone raising their hand. So I'm guessing all doubts have been cleared. Thank you so much everyone for joining us. We will upload the recording of this session along with the PPT on our YouTube channel, so you can have a look at that just in case you missed anything or joined us slightly late. Both Abhishek and Anvita have put their email IDs on in chat, so feel free to reach out to them. And if you have any other doubts, you can reach out to us at info@projecteduaccess.com. I'm going to put that in chat as well. And that's about it. Hope you all have a nice Sunday wherever you are. And thank you so much, Abhishek and Anvita, once again.
Thank you, everyone, and good luck with the applications.
Yeah, good luck. Bye. Take care.